Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, TJ Mabarty, and today we are going to be wrapping up some final thoughts on the Divisional Round, specifically with the Buffalo Bills, before we start getting on to the championship weekend games. In the second segment, we're going to be talking about the top 5 people in this championship Sunday pool that's still remaining in the NFL and talk about the top 5 people that have the most to gain from a Super Bowl win this season. Then on the second half of the show, we're going to be getting into some NBA, because last night we had a couple historic scoring performances from 2 of the best big men in the league. And then finally, in the last segment, we are going to be breaking down the breaking news of the Miami Heat trading for Charlotte's guard Terry Rozier. Before we get into the show, please remember to like and follow. And if you have any live comments or questions, please be sure to use the link that is scrolling across the ticker throughout the show to help get your questions the priority they deserve. So without further ado, getting into our first segment here, talking about the Buffalo Bills. Now, this is the last time. I don't typically like to harp on teams that just lost, but before we turn the page on them going forward, I just want to briefly go over where do the Buffalo Bills go from here. Just as a brief recap on Sunday's matchup between them and the Chiefs, they lost in the divisional round once again, 27-24. They had the ball 1st and 10 on the Kansas City Chiefs 27-yard line with 2 minutes and 42 seconds left. From there, it was a 1-yard rush from James Cook. Josh Allen is under pressure on 2nd down, and he actually has an open receiver in Khalil Shakir in the back of the end zone, but because he's getting hit from the left side as he throws, he sort of short arms it. And then on 3rd down, the Chiefs brought the pressure, forced Josh Allen to throw the ball away, and because of that, now a 4th and 9, I think it would have been a different conversation if they had picked up some yardage, whether or not you go for it on 4th down, but on 4th and 9, they pretty much have no choice but to kick the field goal. Ultimately, Tyler Bass, their kicker, misses the 44-yard field goal, and the Chiefs are just able to run the ball out. So now, just starting to at least look ahead a little bit on what is next for the Bills. They have 4 upcoming free agents that played at least 50% of the snaps this season. That is Gabriel Davis, their receiver, who has been a captain for them. He played in all 17 regular season games for the Bills. He's been a nice second option to work off of their star receiver, Stephon Diggs, but he missed the 2 postseason games with a knee injury. I believe it was a PCL strain or something along those lines. So he's unavailable for those games, and his absence definitely seemed like it hurt them. We'll get into a little bit more of the specifics on that. But it is him, Micah Hyde, Leonard Floyd, and Tyrell Dodson. Briefly on Gabe Davis here, he has scored at least 6 touchdowns in all 4 of his seasons with the Buffalo Bills. He was a draft pick 4 years ago, and he has posted 6 touchdowns in 1 year and 7 in all the rest. So he has been an impact player from him. They picked him up in the 3rd round a few years ago. So the Bills have a good history, I'd say. They're definitely not a bad drafting team, but haven't had a ton of stars develop from the draft themselves other than Josh Allen himself. So Gabe Davis has been a big piece of this team in the past few years for the Bills. He said he's open to returning to Buffalo, but he does plan on testing free agency. There was an interesting clip that emerged after their loss where he was sort of going at it with some Bills fans. Obviously a very emotionally charged situation there following that loss, but just a little bit of an interesting situation going on there. And as far as the Bills looking to re-sign him, now they have a very expensive payroll going forward. According to Pro Football Focus, they are 29th in salary cap entering this offseason. And some of the cause of that is the fact that Josh Allen has just completed his 5th season with the team, which means he is no longer on his rookie contract. His cap number will jump from $18.6 million to $47.1 next year. So we've sort of seen this in the past recently with the Chiefs of they're going to have to cut some salary on certain places, and it's not going to be quite as easy to construct the roster now that your quarterback, which of course you had to pay the money that you did, he is now going to be more expensive himself. How do you get around that? Sort of like I alluded to, a lot of the time it is the draft is the way to sort of work your way around, get some cheap, valuable contracts on the books. So they need to start hitting on some of these draft picks. And again, it's not that they have been bad necessarily in the draft. They have a handful of impact players, but just 2 all-pro first-team draft picks within the past 10 seasons. That is Matt Milano and Tre'Davious White, who they took in 2017. They got both of them. Now, they were missing both of them for a lot of this season due to injuries. So they weren't able to be on the field in the most crucial moments of the season, which definitely hurt them. It was part of the reason why their defense struggled so much against the Chiefs this past week. They'll be getting them back next year, of course, but you're just going to need to see whether it's the drafting itself or whether it is the development of these players. They're going to need to sort of pick it up a notch between drafting and development. Similarly to the Kansas City Chiefs, I think that where it really becomes interesting is how much do you pay your weapons for your quarterback, and how much do you pay for them, and are you willing to invest in the top end talent there? Now, if you look at the Chiefs, obviously they made the blockbuster move to trade Tyreek Hill to the Dolphins, knowing that he was going to get a very large contract, and that with Patrick Mahomes' contract kicking in, they weren't going to be able to pay him. They were also already paying Travis Kelce a very large number himself, so they decided to part ways with Tyreek Hill and sort of see if, when you have your franchise quarterback, you would think that a lot of the time he will be able to raise the play of everybody around him. And I know that there's been a lot of conversation about the Chiefs receivers this season, but as we saw last season, it was still a fairly similar situation. Now, Travis Kelce was a lot healthier last year, and he was extremely effective. Now, he's been good for these past 2 weeks there were a couple drops in the Miami game, but very, very cold weather for that wild card matchup. So he is sort of starting to reemerge. They drafted Rashee Rice out of SMU in one of the, I believe he was a day 2 pick, maybe the 3rd round, maybe the 2nd round, but he's been really good for them. He's come along during the course of the season. And yes, they've dealt with a lot of drops, but that is sort of the price you have to pay when you are paying your quarterback so much money. You need to cut back in certain areas. And given that quarterback is such a valuable position, you would think that he is able to make it work with, at times, cheaper options around him. Now, this sort of leads me into a conversation about Stefon Diggs. As we know, Stefon Diggs, an incredibly talented wide receiver. He has been for the past few years, but there is a little bit of a conversation about him not being super effective in the playoffs when they need him the most. Now, you can blame that on a couple different things. Last year, I think it stemmed way further than just himself. I thought that the offense was very much too reliant on the explosive plays. And now, while that was somewhat the case this year, I thought that they were better. I thought that they had more of a run game. So he wasn't quite as necessary sort of in those circumstances. But at the same time, you know, it's kind of hard when you look at the second half of the season, and he was pretty ineffective. He is owed $18 million, $19 million, and $15 million over the course of the next 3 seasons. By the time his contract is out, he's going to be 34 years old. As we know, it's not impossible, but the receiver position typically ages a little. It can be shaky down the past 30-year-old season, and it's going to be interesting to see how he's able to hold up. And if you look at the second half of this year, it was actually Khalil Shakir and some of the other guys that were stepping up more. I thought that the Bills' offense looked better when Josh Allen was not trying to force feed Stephon Diggs, and he was looking to spread the ball around more. And it was very clear a lot of the time they were trying to get him involved because, yes, they do need him, especially when they're paying him as much money. And you know he has that talent that you want to make sure that he's involved. He's invested mentally as well. And it just didn't really play out great for him down the stretch of the season. Through the last 10 games, he had 422 yards on 80 targets. Now, his counterpart, Khalil Shakir, he had just 37 targets, but he put up 462 yards. So, more yards on less than half of the targets. And I think that it's a little concerning if you look at this, given that your quarterback is going to be paid all of this money, and you need to make sure that the guys you are paying are effective. Now, I don't mean to just single out Stephon Diggs here, because this is a whole front office thing, and these are the types of conversations that they're going to have to be having internally going into this offseason. Now, another example of this is a couple seasons ago, they paid Von Miller a five-digit contract with over $10 million per season. I believe it was 14, 15, and at the time it made a lot of sense in theory. Von Miller was coming off of a very effective season with the LA Rams. He went and won a Super Bowl there. And this Bills team felt like they were right on the precipice of being, I mean, they've been Super Bowl contenders, but they thought that this was a move that could help push them over the edge. And he has largely been ineffective. That being said, you know, in his 30s, he was drafted over a decade ago, and he had a torn ACL, I think it was. He had a season-ending injury early in his Bills career, really struggled to work back from it, and you know what? He got his contract. That's great. I think that he is an all-time player, but that's also the risk you take when you pay such an old player that much money. Now, at the time, it seemed like it was team-friendly too. They have an out, I think, coming into this offseason where they can let him loose and not be hit too much with dead cap or anything like that. We'll see how they choose to maneuver that situation. But just another example of what's been going on with the Bills front office, what they have to do moving forward to try and recalibrate themselves with this spike in Josh Allen's contract due. Now, quickly before the break, I know that a lot of people have sort of unsure about Sean McDermott. I'm somewhat in that camp. I just don't think that it's all his fault. I think that he probably doesn't get enough credit. Yes, this year didn't start out well, but they were practically playing playoff games through the whole second half of the year after starting 6-6. And in 7 seasons as the Bills head coach, he's only had 1 losing season. He has 5 straight 10-win seasons. And you know, you can look at the fake punt, but ultimately that wasn't even why they lost the game on Sunday. So I do think that, yes, there's a lot of talent available coaching-wise in the open market this offseason, but I do think that he's established a culture there. The team chemistry, it seems like his guys like playing for him, so I expect him to be back for them next year, and I don't think it should be all too controversial. So that is it for the Bills. We're going to leave it there with them until we get into some of these more off-season conversations in the future. For now, we're going to be moving on to the championship weekend ahead of us. And when we come back from the break, I'm going to be giving you my top 5 people in the NFL right now that would benefit most from a Super Bowl win this season. So be sure to stick around.